I'm Paula Montry, and I'm the middle school librarian here at Friends. And I focused on 21st century teaching and learning specifically as it applied to technology and information literacy. One of the things that was also neat is that I went about looking at 21st century teaching and learning by not asking directed questions about it. I listened to the stories of other people, and then I took what I had listened to and made some conclusions about it. So, for example, I didn't come out and say, how do you use technology to be a 21st century educator? I think that when you ask something like that, we use the thinking parts of our brain and we use our intelligence to answer that. Where I wanted people to talk about what inspired them, and then if an incidence of technology came up in that, then I looked at how that was working. I sort of looked at it as a bright spot. What was your bright spot in your teaching, and did technology coincide with it? And then I think that gave me better information about how technology can be transformative and not just something that we sort of do because we feel like our students need to have these how-to skills. And what I found was that technology can be really transformative when it has to do with a student making an aha moment. Sometimes I get frustrated when I hear people associate 21st century teaching and learning with technology. And it's not because I don't love technology, which I do, but I don't think that that is a direct tie-in. I think it is something that maybe teachers can use to beat themselves up with. They can say, well, I'm not up on the current technology, so therefore I'm not a 21st century teacher. And that is really sad to hear sometimes, because I think it isn't about replacing all of the things that I used to do with some technology that's newer. I don't think that, it's like, oh, I used to do everything in PowerPoint, but now there's this new thing, and so now I need to transfer everything that I did into this new thing. I think it's more about looking at who your learners are and looking at the tools that you have, all the things that you have possible in your environment to make whatever it is that you're learning real for the students and relevant to them. During Grow, I had a plagiarism epiphany. Um, I looked at the way that I was teaching plagiarism completely differently. Some of it had to do with the experimentation I did in my class this semester, and also some of it had to do with conversation I had with Ben Roach, who I got a chance to talk to on a couple of occasions. And he introduced me to a book called Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And he really changed the way that I look at it. I think that I had been looking at plagiarism as a set of skills, or, if you know what plagiarism is, then of course you won't do it. But that's not really how it works. And when I started looking at the work and research in particular as being a way of discovering your voice, and everybody starts out in life imitating the work of others, and they sort of try on different things for size. So if I'm an artist, I might look at work of certain artists that I admire, and I might mimic them, and then along the way I might change something a little bit that is more me than the person, but I still have influence from those masters of the craft. And then eventually I pull away and I start to discover what is my authentic voice. And so I started looking at plagiarism that way, addressing the anxieties that students had as they tried to figure out what is me and what is somebody else, and started to focus more on that and less on the rules of, do this, don't do this, those things that were kind of anxiety producing. And if students started to feel like it was about discovering who they were a lot more into it too than they were in hearing all of the rules for reasons for not plagiarizing. So I think that brought it into the 21st century realm for me, because it became more student-centered at that point. So when I was in school, there was this thing called Dale's Cone of Experience. Some of you may have heard of it. It looks like this. Okay. So up here on this part of the cone, you have reading about whatever it is you're learning about. And people tend to remember about 10% of what they read about. And down here at the bottom part of the cone, you've got being there. So here we've got reading about Indonesia, being in Indonesia, and experiencing immersion with Indonesia. So the idea was that the more you could get towards that immersion experience, the further down on the cone or up on the cone um, that you could create, the better learning would happen for students. So as a librarian, I want to look, when I create structures for learning, I want to look at, have I used everything in my environment possible to make this as real as possible for students? So, for example, have I tried contacting somebody from Indonesia to see if they can collaborate with us? And I could try to recreate an Indonesian dance, and I can use any sources available to me. But the good thing about technology and the good thing about a 21st century tool like Skype or Google Hangout or something like that is I can do things that aren't possible or are cost prohibitive. So I can't fly all of my kids out to Indonesia, but I probably could do a blogging exchange with students from Indonesia. We have the ability to do that. So I still, as a teacher, may choose not to do that. That I want to put them somewhere else on the cone of experience, or that I'm going to focus on this. But I have to consider that before I construct any learning, and I have to see, is it possible and is it desirable? So I think that's one of the things that I found too is if you look at technology and 21st century opportunities as sort of an artistic medium. Do I want to do this in watercolors, or do I want to do it in acrylics, or do I want to have people sketch? If you look at it that way, then you're still making a choice, but you're using that choice to transform the learning. Now a little bit about the GROW experience itself. I've done action research before, and this was definitely not action research. There wasn't any effort to be objective or to collect data. This was really going very deeply into the experiences of other people. And I was so glad we had 50 hours to do this, because I don't think we could have gotten to this level without the time and the trust building and all of the things that came first. I have to say that even though I was one of the people who was in on first thinking about what we wanted GROW to be, I was kind of a late bloomer to my epiphany about GROW, because I was doing exactly what I tell my students not to, which is I was so focused on the product or the outcome that I had forgotten that I needed to actually go through the experience too. So for example, we wanted to create some kind of video at the end of this, and what I found was I wanted to try to synthesize everything I'd learned into 90 seconds, because that's what we were going to share out. And I hadn't had the time to really process all of those different thoughts that would lead up to that 90 seconds. I just sort of started at the end result. So it was a real revelation for me in terms of what we ask our students to do. We want them to produce a product, and we know what the product looks like at the end of the process, but we really don't understand how hard it is to not begin with the end in mind. It's just a different way of thinking of things. So the GROW process really, it wasn't a step-by-step kind of thing. It was, I think Carol used the analogy of you're driving in a car late at night and you can only see what the headlights reveal. And we sort of tried to philosophically do that, where we would only plan a little bit ahead of time, and we wouldn't try to think about what was down the road or overplan it, because what you discover sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning is that where you thought you were going, you really don't want to go, and you want to make some changes to it. And then it was coming back together with a group of people and sharing those feelings too. And that's something I don't think you do a lot when you're doing traditional action research. So this was a great experience for that.